So hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Secrets of the Viz. This month we're doing a Christmas special diving into all the Iron Viz entries, and today I have Brian with me here to share his amazing entry which has a very cool technique within. So over to you Brian to do a short intro.
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name is Brian Moore. I live in the US, just a little bit north of Boston, Massachusetts, with my wife, Jackie Moore, who many of you probably know, and also my son, my two dogs, and my cat. I currently work as a team lead for a consulting company called Clear Intelligence. I've been there for about 5 years now. I've been using Tableau for close to a decade now, I think. So I spend all day at work in Tableau and then a pretty good amount of my free time as well. I like to build pretty unique visualizations for Tableau Public. I also have a blog that I share with my wife called domorewithdata.com. I also co-lead the Boston Tableau user group with Jackie as well. I've been a Tableau public ambassador for 5 years now and a Tableau visionary for 3 years.
That's awesome. And I gotta say, your website name is so unique because it's an excellent play of words.
Yeah, our last name makes for some pretty easy puns.
So I first got to know your work through Tina actually, when you did the collab on Squid Game with her, which was really amazing with all the animations and stuff. Season 2 it's coming out next week. Are you excited about
Yeah.
it?
Oh yeah, definitely looking forward to it. Hopefully be able to do a sequel on that viz as well.
I think you should. Your Tableau Public collection is pretty unique because you have a lot of different kind of advanced visualizations. Last year's Iron Beast was also really impressive with the Lord of the Rings. You have the polygons drawing all the different characters, and that was really mind blowing. You also have a recreation of games that you did like Pac-Man, Rubik's Cube, and checkers as well, which I learned a lot from your techniques. But those are not what we are here to talk about today. So maybe you can start off by sharing how you actually came about the topic, because entertainment is quite a wide topic.
Yeah, so I actually came up with the topic before Iron Viz theme was announced. I wasn't planning on entering this year, but I was already working on something that fit the theme pretty well. So I kind of expanded on it to make it more of a Iron Viz worthy dashboard. But yeah, I think spin-offs are really interesting. They give you a chance to dig deeper into some of the characters that you've grown to love over the years, expand on some of the storylines that might have been minor in the main show. And there's an incredibly wide range of potential outcomes when it comes to spin-offs. For example, you take two shows like Cheers and Friends. They're both really long-running sitcoms based on like a group of characters, their everyday lives. And from one of those, you get Frasier, which went for like 11 seasons and was really highly rated. And then from the other, you got Joey, which is universally used as an example of a terrible spin-off. Then you have reality TV, where it seems like every character on a reality TV show ends up getting their own show, and it just kind of snowballs and proliferates. So I thought it would be interesting to look at spin-off data. I wasn't going to enter this year, but I'd already
The stars aligned.
most of the way.
So maybe you can share your screen and we can talk through a little bit on the design inspiration behind it.
Sure. So this was kind of what I was working on before they announced the Iron Viz theme. So originally it was just going to look at the original versus the spin-off, say the top 40 or bottom 40, small multiple chart where you can kind of see everything there. It looked a lot cooler in my head. And then when I actually got it down, wasn't really happy with it. I also had a lot more data that I wasn't really able to use when just looking at this really high level. So I decided to pivot from this and then focus in on one spin-off at a time. So I was going to start, and so you could select one spin-off, one show, and dig really deep into the comparison between that show and the original. Each of these lines were like a season. I was going to have all the episodes orbiting it, and then I was going to have a bunch of other charts mixed in there. I didn't end up making it very far on this piece. I started to pivot from there into more of a traditional Iron Viz storytelling dashboard. This was the first visual that I had come up with for that. And I started building that out into the long form. As I was building this out, I realized that it was getting pretty overwhelming, especially with just the sheer number of charts that I wanted to have in here. This was probably less than a quarter of what I wanted to do overall. So it just seemed like it was going to be a lot for one dashboard. There's also a lot of interactivity that was really crucial to the story. You really had to click in sequence to be able to get the whole story. It's not really a way in a long form dashboard to make sure that the user is following that kind of path that you set out for them. You can do a lot to try to guide them, but ultimately it's going to be on the user to click through. So I decided on this kind of like more navigation based format where there's just one button that the user can click through the entire story. That way they can consume it in bite-sized pieces, and you can also have a lot of control over the sequence.
So one thing, I think the design for this is pretty interesting. Is this inspired from your previous biz? Because I know that you did a global domestic product biz on like sustainable goals, and you had the circular chart with different radial shapes around.
So that was actually inspired from Avec Kovacs. Actually, I have it up here. This Sorry Sweetie Viz, which is really insightful, really impactful, and just beautifully designed. She had a blog post that walked through how to do this gradient technique. And I think Kevin and Ken Flerledge have also done some cool stuff with gradients. So all of the gradients design in my workbook, it was definitely inspired by those.
Yeah, I think this technique is really interesting because I took a look at your calculations within the workbook and it's a lot. But I love that you have the appendix. That actually helped me to understand a lot on how you actually create that gradient, because you can play around with the parameters and gives you a visual feedback on how things are being drawn.
Yeah, I'm actually working on a viz now that's using these gradients as well. And I've made some improvements to this technique, but I'm going to write up a blog post on it soon.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah, but basically the technique is very similar where it's just a ton of individual lines placed very close to each other to make it look like something. And then you use some kind of numeric value on a sequential color palette to get that gradient effect.
This is extremely cool, I gotta say. So in terms of the data, is it hard to gather all the data to build the viz and the gradients itself? Because I imagine that there's probably a lot of densification that goes behind the scenes.
The data collection and prep was probably the majority of the work on this project. There's not really a comprehensive, all-encompassing list of every spin-off ever made. So I ended up manually collecting that data from Wikipedia. IMDb has a few lists. Ranker had a bunch of lists. And then a bunch of random Google searches to fill in the blanks to see if I was missing anything. So just collecting the list of the spin-offs and like the original shows was very manual. And then I had to map that data to the IMDb data. Joining those two sources was a pretty manual effort. The only thing I had to join on was the name, and the names don't match perfectly. There could be a name that is actually used for multiple shows over the years, so you have multiple matches. So it was a really manual process to get the IMDb IDs into the list of spinoffs and TV shows. Even beyond that, once I had all that, I started building, but I realized these gradients, each one of these single circle here is hundreds, potentially thousands of marks. So just in one sheet, you could have tens of thousands, even 100,000s of marks. Performance was going to be really crucial. This entire dashboard is driven by like, what we'll call it the navigation order. So if you go to one of these charts, there's a parameter called nav order. When you open it up, it's set to 1. Each time you make a click, it increases that. And that's what drives basically everything. So in my data source, I actually have basically the exact data that I need for every navigation order value. So that's for 1, for 2, for 3, all the way down. I know this doesn't look like a lot of data, but this is before the densification. These are the high level records I need for actually 40 or so clicks. And then the densification basically takes that stacked data source and blows it out to create all of those additional kind of densified points. Each chart is made up of different elements, so that one we just looked at, which is 1, this custom radial, we have a large circle, which is this. We have the medium circles, which is the circles around it. We have the radial lines, which are these brown lines here, and then we have a polygon for this kind of light brown circle here. So this table takes that chart type, breaks it out into different kind of subtypes, and then densifies it further, and then even further, and then even further. So I end up with thousands of points for every like piece of every chart. So like that, the final data source I think was only like a couple hundred rows, and then once I densified it, it was like close to 1 million because of that kind of tiered densification.
How do you actually work through all these different processes? Because like you would have to have an idea of how the end this was gonna turn out.
I mean, it's probably different on every project that I work on, but it's a lot of back and forth. It's starting with some data, going to Tableau, realizing I need to change my data, going and restructuring the data, going back to Tableau and get back and forth. It's not like I created this massive data source in this format and then started building. And especially for this one where performance was so key, the structure of that data source changed 1,000 times. Originally, it was just a table of data and then one densification table, but then realizing that I needed to really filter it down to get better performance, I ended up doing that stacking and tiered densification. Because if you've ever worked with a typical densification table, normally if you need 25 records for something, you just create 25 records. But I had so many different pieces and I had to like fine tune it for performance. So I set it up where I could just enter a number here for how many records I wanted, and then doing like a Cartesian join to this extra points and just using a filter to filter out the additional ones instead of creating 700 rows for this, 300 rows for this.
That's a really cool way of doing it because the way that you have approached this is really optimized. Like what are the key points when you think about getting a dashboard performance?
I typically start with filtering down the data. So you're just working with exactly what you need, whether you can use, I'd say limiting the number of marks in the view, but like I said, most of these have thousands of marks in the view, so that's not really an option, but that is definitely something that's really important for performance. Using dashboard actions instead of quick filters. So if you look at my Tableau public profile, I don't think there's a single quick filter to be found. It's all dashboard interactivity parameters and set actions.
I never knew that. So dashboard actions are quicker than quick filters.
Yeah, quick filters are pretty slow. And the more you add, the slower it becomes. And then things like doing only relevant values slows it down even more.
For me, on in work, I do use a lot of quick filters because the the audience requires that amount of flexibility in it. But we've been trying to cut it down. So maybe I could explore shifting some of that to parameter actions or something.
Yeah, basically, I try to not have a quick filter. Sometimes it's tricky because people want to do multi-select, which you can do with actions, but it's not really out of the box functionality. Yeah, so I think that the navigation is set up pretty cool. The entire thing is one dashboard. So it looks completely different depending on what section you're in. It uses a ton of dynamic zone visibility to decide what's shown. If you click all the way through this, it looks like there's a ton of different charts, but it's actually just all done in 3 worksheets. So there is this kind of radial chart that's reused a few times here. There's vertical charts, and then there's horizontal charts. Then they show you here. And there's a lot of map layers being used. So this is for a vertical bar. So it uses these 5 pieces. You have the actual bar, which is not rounded. It's not rounded until you add this little circle behind it. It looks like a rounded bar, but it's actually a circle and a bar together, just stacked on top of each other. And you have the labels and then the polygons for the boxes down here.
Map layers are really powerful. I love the fact that you have the circle and the bar just overlaying, and it seems like the gradient is kind of blending through the entire thing. It doesn't feel like it's 2 separate things. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, if you look really closely, you can see there's like a little break, but yeah, I spent a lot of time trying to get those to
like you say, just going back and forth, making changes to the data model and all. It's a lot of effort.
Yeah, this is definitely the most like complex thing I've ever tried to build in Tableau. Not just the sheets, but like the navigation and getting it all working. It took me a while to start using map layers, but I love them now. Like I was always stacking a bunch of charts on top of each other anyways, but you couldn't get the tooltips on the lower charts. If you had to move one chart, you had to move all of them. It was a huge pain, but like map layers makes it real easy.
Again, really amazing work. So I think we have everything we need from your Viz, and thank you again for walking us through this amazing Viz and your process. I think there's a lot to learn for the community, and everyone probably going to be very inspired by this particular Viz. I think this year's Viz is very challenging for the judges because out of 191, I can easily spot like 30 to 50 that are really good. So the judging is going to be very tough.
Yeah, absolutely. I do not envy the judges. Hoping to land somewhere in that sweet spot between 4 and 10.
I mean, your Viz should be like the top three, to be honest. Like, you should be on stage.
Nah, I don't want to do that.
You see, that's the funny thing. I've spoken to a few guests on this show, and a lot of them wants to stay within the sweet spot of 4 to 10 so that they don't have to be on stage. It's like I would have thought that people are striving to hit like the top 3, but it's actually not the case.
Not me. I got in the top 10 a couple years ago, and then I didn't enter Iron Viz for the next couple of years because I was scared that it was too close.
Yeah, you are definitely very close to the top 3 for sure. Cool. So thank you again, Brian, for walking us through this amazing Viz, and we'll see everyone tomorrow. Thank you. Take care, Brian. Merry Christmas.
All right, you too. Thank you.